screaming metal, roaring fire. Captain Marcus Thorne's F-16 Falcon was disintegrating around him, thousands of feet above a war-torn desert. Alarms shrieked a deafening chorus of doom. His controls were dead. One enemy missile had already crippled his jet. Another was screaming in. Through the shattered, flame-lit canopy, he saw the hostile Earth rushing up to meet him. There was no choice. With a prayer burned onto his soul and his family's faces seared into his mind, Stryker yanked the ejection handle. The cockpit exploded away. He was violently rocketed into the sky. A lone American pilot, shot from his exploding fighter, falling helpless into the heart of an active war zone. This is his incredible story of survival, a testament to courage that will shock you and leave you profoundly inspired. Captain Marcus Stryker, Thorne was a product of the Texas heartland, where big skies fueled even bigger dreams of flight. His father, a veteran, had instilled in him a core of discipline and an unshakable sense of duty. Do what's right, son, especially when it's hard. That creed, coupled with a burning ambition, propelled him through the grueling training to earn the silver wings of an Air Force fighter pilot. His call sign, Stryker, was a nod to his precision and cool nerve under pressure. He knew his F-16 Falcon intimately, a seamless extension of his own will. Stationed at a forward operating base in a volatile region, his days were a rhythm of readiness. The scent of jet fuel a familiar comfort. He was a leader, respected by his squadron, the men and women who were more than colleagues. They were family, but Stryker carried a private weight, a shadow from his past that sharpened his focus to a razor's edge. Years before, a catastrophic training accident, a sudden, unavoidable mechanical failure, had severely injured his wingman and close friend Dave Dusty Rhodes. Though cleared of any blame, the sight of Dusty's burning jet, the desperate calls, had etched themselves into Stryker's memory. It wasn't guilt that haunted him, but profound, almost sacred responsibility to protect those under his command, to ensure every pilot made a home. This deep-seated vow manifested in meticulous planning and an almost obsessive attention to detail. Tucked in his flight suit, over his heart, was a worn photo of his wife, Sarah, and their bright-eyed 5-year-old daughter, Lily. They were his anchor, his reason, the future he fought to protect. This man, husband, father, Texan, American airman, was about to fly into a sky that would test every fiber of his being. The mission was code-named Eagle Eye, high-altitude reconnaissance over the Kavar mountain range, a desolate, jagged spine of rock rumored to hide new enemy fortifications. Stryker and his wingman, Lieutenant Jake "Kid" Miller, a capable but newer pilot on his first combat tour, were to gather imagery. "Eyes sharp, Kid," Stryker had briefed. "We're just looking. In and out. No heroics." Kid, eager but palpably nervous, had absorbed every word. Stryker remembered his own first taste of combat, the electric surge of adrenaline, the surreal shift from training to reality. They sliced through the thin air in a loose combat spread, 2 silver falcons against an endless azure canvas. Below, the terrain was a study in brutal beauty, deep ravines and sharp peaks, ideal for concealment, deadly for a downed pilot. Stryker's senses were dialed to maximum, his gaze sweeping his instruments, the sky, the ground. He trusted his training, his aircraft, but above all his instincts. And his instincts were whispering a warning. The airwaves were too quiet. The landscape below, unnervingly still. Then it happened, fast, lethal, and without warning. A high-pitched, urgent tone ripped through Stryker's headset. Missile lock. His threat display blazed red. "Sam launch. Sam launch." 6 o'clock low, the automated voice shrieked. Instinctively, Stryker twisted, searching, and saw it, a slender white smoke trail rocketing upwards from a perfectly camouflaged position they hadn't detected. A sophisticated surface-to-air missile, far deadlier than anticipated, and it was locked onto Kid Miller's F-16. The rookie, startled, reacted, but he was a fraction of a second behind the missile's blistering pace. His aircraft was still squarely in its kill zone. In that compressed instant where instinct eclipses thought, Stryker didn't hesitate. The ghostly image of dusty roads, trapped in a spiraling, burning wreck, flashed in his mind. Not again. Not on my watch. Kid, brake right. Flares. Dump flares now. Stryker's command, calm yet utterly urgent, crackled across the radio. In the same heartbeat, he slammed his own control stick hard left, wrenching his Falcon into a punishing high-G turn, deliberately maneuvering his own aircraft directly between his wingman and the rapidly closing missile. He was offering himself as a bigger, hotter target, buying Kid precious, life-saving seconds. It was a selfless, split-second decision born of pure protective instinct and years of honed skill, a hero's gamble. The sky around Stryker instantly transformed into a deadly, three-dimensional game of cat and mouse. The first missile, momentarily confused by his aggressive maneuver and the sudden appearance of a more enticing target, wavered, but its relentless seeker had reacquired. Stryker felt a familiar kick as his F-16 spewed a dazzling cloud of flares and chaff, decoys against heat-seeking and radar-guided threats. He jinked, rolled, pulled GS that threatened to black him out, his flight suit constricting, his vision tunneling. He was a virtuoso in this lethal aerial ballet, but his adversary was brutally efficient. Missiles still tracking. Still hot, his systems blared. Then, a new horror, a second launch. Another smoke trail clawed its way skyward. Now there were two. He managed to evade the first. It shrieked past his canopy, so close he felt a wave of its fiery passage. A hair's breadth from obliteration. But the second missile, it was a newer generation, faster, smarter. Stryker threw every evasive maneuver he knew at it, pushing his aircraft and his own body to their absolute breaking points. For one heart-stopping moment, he thought he might outfly it too. Then impact, not a direct hit, but a catastrophic glancing blow to his right wing and engine. A horrifying metallic scream echoed through the airframe, followed by an explosion that felt like a giant's hammer blow. His F-16 shuddered violently, a mortally wounded eagle. Warning lights flashed across his console in a blinding, panicked symphony of failure. The control stick went limp and useless in his grasp. Oily black flames erupted from the right side of his fuselage, licking menacingly back towards the cockpit. Mayday, mayday, mayday. Stryker is hit. I'm hit. Going down. Repeat. Stryker's going down. His voice, strained but remarkably steady, cut through the static to his wingman. He could hear Kid's frantic replies. Stryker, what's your position? Talk to me, Strike. But his world was already tilting, spinning, the ground rushing up with terrifying velocity. There was no saving the aircraft. It was tearing itself apart around him. His emergency training, ingrained through countless simulator hours and drills, took over. Altitude check, still sufficient. Airspeed, decaying rapidly. Fire in the cockpit, spreading. Eject, eject, eject. His hand, moving on pure muscle memory, found a yellow and black striped handle between his knees. He pulled. The ejection sequence was a blur of violent forces and deafening noise. The canopy shattered and blew clear. The seat's rocket motor ignited with a brutal, concussive roar, punching him upwards and outwards, away from the flaming, spiraling wreckage of his beloved Falcon. He was a rag doll, thrown into the wind blast, the G-forces attempting to rip him limb from limb. For a disorienting moment, he saw his jet, now a funeral pyre of twisted metal and fire, arcing towards a hostile Earth. Then he was tumbling again, fighting for consciousness. Parachute. His gloved hand fumbled for the D-ring, found it, and pulled. The jolt of the main canopy deploying was savage, snapping him upright, but it was the most welcome agony he'd ever experienced. Silence, sudden and profound, replaced the cacophony of the dying jet and the explosion. Now, there was only the whisper of the wind through his parachute lines, and the terrifying, slow descent toward a landscape that promised only danger. He was alive, but he was utterly alone. deep inside enemy territory, a vulnerable target dangling beneath a silken canopy. The heroic act of shielding his wingman had saved Kid Miller, but it had cost Stryker dearly. His own survival now hung by the most fragile threads. The ground rushed up with alarming speed. Stryker, fighting the parachute's oscillation, frantically scanned the terrain below. Jagged rocks, thorny scrub, narrow, winding wadis, perfect for ambush, terrible for evasion. He could already spot them, small figures, distant but distinct, moving on the ground. Enemy patrols, undoubtedly alerted by the SAM launches and the fiery spectacle of his F-16's demise. They would be converging on his projected landing zone like vultures to a carcass. His heart hammered against his ribs. He hit the ground hard, the impact sending a searing bolt of pain through his left leg. He gritted his teeth, performing a parachute landing fall to dissipate the force, then immediately scrambled to action, disconnect harness, gather canopy, conceal it. Every second was critical. His sear, survival, evasion, resistance, escape, training, drilled into him until his instinct took command. He found a shallow depression among the rocks, hastily stuffing the voluminous silk and nylon under boulders and thorny brush. Not perfect, but it would have to do. He took a precious moment to assess his condition. His flight suit was torn. Blood seeped from a gash on his forehead, stinging his eyes. His left leg throbbed violently. A quick, painful check revealed a nasty, bleeding gash, likely from shrapnel or the violent forces of ejection. He fumbled in his survival vest for his med kit, pulling out a pressure dressing and applying it with practice, albeit agonizing, efficiency. Adrenaline still coursed through him, a temporary shield against the worst of the pain, but he knew its effects were fleeting. He checked his survival radio. Damaged. The casing was cracked, the antenna bent askew. He tried it anyway. Static. Nothing but harsh, mocking static. He was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The sun began its descent toward the rugged horizon, painting the sky in breathtaking hues of orange and purple, a cruelly beautiful backdrop to his desperate plight. He had to move, and move now. Night would offer some concealment, but the enemy possessed numbers and local knowledge. They would have trackers, possibly dogs. He was one man, injured, against an organized enemy force in their own backyard. The odds were overwhelmingly against him. Thoughts of Sarah and Lily flooded his mind, a surge of profound love and a desperate, aching yearning. He couldn't fail them. He wouldn't. That conviction, more potent than any training manual, became his fuel. He pushed himself to his feet, his injured legs screaming in protest. He chose a direction, away from the crash site, towards higher, more broken ground where he might find better cover. His evasion had begun. The next hours were an agonizing blur of excruciating effort and constant, heightened vigilance. He moved slowly, deliberately, using every scrap of cover, every shadow. He avoided exposed ridgelines, sticking to the low ground, listening, always listening, for any sound that might betray the hunters or his own presence. The pain in his leg was a relentless, burning fire, but he forced it from his conscious mind, focusing only on the next step, the next potential hiding place. Several times he heard voices, distant shouts, the bark of a dog. Each time he froze, melting into the terrain, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, until the sounds receded. He was a ghost in the landscape, a whisper on the wind, driven by a primal, unyielding will to survive. As false dawn began to paint the eastern sky a pale, cold gray, he stumbled upon a small, narrow cleft at the base of a rocky outcrop, a shallow cave, little more than an overhang, but offered concealment. Exhausted, dehydrated, and shivering despite the desert air, he crawled inside. He tried his radio again, fiddling with the damaged antenna, shielding it with his body, hoping for a miracle. He cycled through frequencies, his hope dwindling with each silent, static-filled channel. Then a flicker, a faint, almost imperceptible crackle. He mashed the transmit button. Mayday, Mayday, this is Stryker. Any friendly station. Acknowledge. A burst of static, then a voice, weak, broken, but undeniably a voice. Riker? Stryker, is that you? This is Kid. I read you. Barely. What's your status over? It was Kid Miller. He had evaded. He was trying to coordinate. A sliver of hope, razor thin but incredibly potent, pierced through Stryker's enveloping despair. Kid, I'm down, injured, evading, approximate. He tried to give coordinates, describing the terrain features as best he could, his voice hoarse, weak from thirst and exhaustion. Enemy patrols active. The signal was fading in and out, frustratingly unstable. Radio failing. Then nothing. The radio went dead completely. The fragile connection was severed. Stryker slumped against the cold rock. He had made contact. Kid knew he was alive. They would try to get to him. But the transmission had been too brief, too garbled. Pinpointing his exact location in this vast, hostile wilderness from that fragmented message would be a monumental, perhaps impossible, task. And any rescue attempt would be incredibly perilous, drawing friendly forces into the same hornet's nest he was trapped in. A wave of guilt washed over him. He was a liability, a magnet for more danger. But then, the image of Sarah and Lily, their faces vivid and bright in his mind's eye, pushed the guilt aside. He had to hold on. He had to give his rescuers a chance. He carefully rationed the small amount of water in his survival kit, ate a single dry protein bar, and steeled himself for another day of hiding, another night of agonizing flight. The stakes had never been higher. His life, and potentially the lives of his rescuers, depended on his resilience, his training, and a desperate need for luck. 2 days, or had it been 3, time had dissolved into a fluid, meaningless torment, measured only by the relentless cycles of sun and moon, the agonizing ebb and flow of pain, and the ever-present, gnawing companions of hunger and thirst. Stryker's initial surge of adrenaline had long since abandoned him, leaving behind a deep, bone-aching weariness. His leg wound throbbed incessantly, a fiery protest with every tortured movement. Infection was a looming, terrifying specter. He had managed to locate a tiny, brackish sheet of water, filtering it painstakingly through a piece of cloth from his flight suit, but it was a pitifully inadequate supply. His lips were cracked and bleeding, his tongue thick and swollen. Hallucinations, fleeting and disturbing phantoms, danced at the periphery of his vision. He had moved twice from his initial cave hiding spot, each relocation a monumental effort of will, driven by the chillingly close sounds of the pursuers. He'd heard them, the guttural shouts of men, the angry, baying barks of dogs systematically sweeping the valley below him. They were relentless. They were closing in. He was now holed up in a dense thicket of thorny bushes on a steep, unforgiving hillside, offering meager concealment but a slightly better vantage point. He knew, with a grim, cold certainty, that they would find him soon. His physical strength was rapidly failing. Capture, or a swift, brutal end, seemed inevitable. As the third night bled into a cold, gray pre-dawn, he heard them again, closer than ever before. Voices, carried on the still morning air, chillingly distinct, almost conversational. They were at the base of the very slope he was on. He could hear the jingle of equipment, the heavy, labored breathing of men climbing. This was it. They were methodically searching, and his inadequate hiding spot was directly in their path. Staying put was a death sentence, or a prelude to an interrogation he knew he couldn't endure without breaking. He wasn't afraid to die, but the thought of capture, of failing his country, his family, that was an unbearable torment. His eyes, gritty and burning from lack of sleep, frantically scanned his immediate surroundings in the dim, ethereal light. To his left, a sheer, dizzying drop. To his right, more exposed, barren hillside. Behind him, the steadily approaching pursuers. And above him, a cliff face, a near-vertical wall of rock, perhaps 60, 70 feet high, fissured and treacherous, leading to a small, narrow ridge line. It looked utterly impossible. A goat path, barely discernible even to his desperate eyes, zigzagged precariously upwards. It was his only chance. A desperate, insane, suicidal gamble. But what other option remained? He took a deep, ragged breath, the cold air searing his lungs. He thought of Sarah's warm smile, Lily's infectious laughter. He thought of his father's unwavering words. Do what's right, son, especially when it's hard. This wasn't just hard. It was bordering on impossible. But it was also his only slender path to potential survival. He whispered a prayer, a plea to any power that might listen. Then, summoning the last dregs of his failing strength, he began to climb. Every movement was agony. His injured legs screamed with each upward pull, threatening to buckle. His hands, raw and bleeding, scrabbled for purchase on the cold, unforgiving rock. Loose scree skittered away beneath his worn boots, each tiny sound potential death knell, threatening to betray his position, threatening to send him plunging into the darkness below. He could hear the enemy soldiers now, directly beneath him, their voices louder, their search pattern closing the distance with terrifying speed. He pressed himself flat against the rock face, willing himself to become invisible, to merge with the ancient stone. He held his breath, listening to their harsh commands, the rustle of their movements as they passed. They were just feet below his precarious perch, completely unaware of the desperate man clinging to life just above their heads. He waited until their sounds receded slightly, then resumed his agonizing ascent. The climb was a living nightmare. His muscles burned with lactic acid. His lungs ached for oxygen. His vision swam with exhaustion. Each handhold, each precarious foothold, was a life-or-death decision. He moved by sheer instinct, by a bloody-minded determination that transcended pain. He was no longer Captain Thorne, F-16 pilot. He was a primal creature, stripped to his core, fighting for survival, fueled by a desperate, flickering hope and a love for his family. Then disaster. His right hand, slick with sweat and blood, slipped on a loose, crumbling rock. His body swung violently outwards, his injured leg screaming in protest as his full weight came crashing down on it. He dangled for a horrifying, heart-stopping second, suspended over the abyss, the ground a dizzying, distant blur. A cry of pain and despair was torn from his lips, muffled against the unyielding stone. This was it. He was going to fall. The image of Lily's face, her innocent eyes wide, her small hand reaching for him, flashed before him with startling, painful clarity. No, he would not fail her. With a guttural roar, a primal surge of adrenaline born of pure love and utter desperation, he kicked out with his good leg, his boot finding a tiny, improbable nub of rock. He pushed, heaved, clawed, his fingernails breaking, his muscles tearing. He found a new handhold, a solid one. He was back on the rock face, trembling uncontrollably, gasping for breath, but still climbing, still fighting. As the first pale fingers of dawn touched the highest peaks, painting them in hues of gold and rose, he was nearing the top of the cliff, utterly exhausted, battered, bleeding from a dozen wounds, but miraculously, astonishingly alive. He hauled his broken body over the lip onto a narrow, exposed ledge. He lay there for a long moment, his chest heaving, every muscle screaming in protest. He had made it. He had cheated death yet again. And then he heard it, a sound that cut through profound exhaustion, a sound that made his heart leap with a wild, improbable, surging hope. Faint at first, then growing stronger, more distinct. The rhythmic, unmistakable thumping of helicopter rotors. Not one, but several. Friendly. It had to be. He squinted towards the eastern sky, his eyes burning. There they were, two HH-60 Pave Hawks, combat search and rescue birds, their gunners vigilantly scanning the terrain, escorted by a pair of A-10 Warthogs, their avenging angels in the sky. Kid Miller. Kid must have moved heaven and earth. They were taking fire. He could see muzzle flashes erupting from the ground, tracer rounds arcing lazily, then viciously, towards the choppers. The enemy knew they were here. They were coming for him. straight into the very teeth of the hornet's nest he had stirred. His desperate gamble had paid off, but it had also drawn his rescuers into immense, immediate danger. The pave hawks were magnificent, brutal angels of mercy, but in this environment, they were also large, vulnerable targets. Enemy fire erupted from multiple concealed positions on surrounding ridges, a deadly crossfire of heavy machine guns and small arms. The A-10s, the legendary hogs, immediately rolled in their GU, 8 Avenger cannons unleashing devastating streams of 30mm rounds. The ground erupted in plumes of smoke, dirt, and flame where their fire struck, a desperate attempt to suppress the enemy positions. But the rescue choppers were still perilously exposed. Stryker, watching from his precarious ledge, felt a fresh surge of anguish. They were risking everything, their lives, for him. He saw one of the pave hawks, call sign Pedro 01, begin its difficult approach towards his cliff face, but the enemy fire was too intense, too accurate. It was forced to peel away sharply, bullets stitching angry lines in the air all around it. The pilot's voice, strained but utterly determined, crackled over the unencrypted guard frequency, which Stryker could faintly pick up on a small emergency beacon receiver in a survival vest. Taking heavy fire, can't get a stable hover. Stryker, if you can hear me, pop smoke. We need to see your exact position. Pinpoint. Stryker had no smoke. He'd used his only signal flare days ago, a futile gesture into an empty sky. But he had his survival mirror. It was a desperate, high-risk move. Using it would pinpoint his location not just for his rescuers, but for every enemy gun in the vicinity with a clear line of sight. But those men and women in the helicopters, they were his brothers and sisters in arms. He wouldn't let them die for him, without doing everything humanly possible. He pulled out the small, polished square of metal. The sun was just cresting the peaks now, a brilliant, blinding orange orb. He angled the mirror, catching the sun's intense rays, flashing it deliberately, precisely, towards a circling pave hawk. Once, twice, 3 times. A tiny, defiant beacon of hope in a vast landscape of death and despair. Got him. Got the mirror flash. A voice yelled exultantly over the radio. He's on that narrow ledge, east face of the cliff. Confirmed visual. Pedro 01, braving the withering fire, banked hard and came in again, slower this time, more deliberately, its door gunners blazing away, suppressing the closest threats with disciplined fury. The roar of its rotors was deafening. A physical force, the downwash threatening to tear Stryker from his narrow perch. A PJ, a pararescueman, appeared in the open doorway, clipped securely into a hoist. Staff Sergeant Kelly Angel Ramirez, her face a mask of intense calm and professionalism despite the bullets snapping and whining around the aircraft. The hoist cable unspooled with agonizing slowness, Angel descending towards him, swinging like a pendulum to the maelstrom of noise, wind, and imminent danger. She was a vision of pure courage, an angel indeed, descending from the sky to pull him from the depths of hell. She reached him, her boots thudding onto the narrow ledge beside him. Her hand, strong and infinitely reassuring, gripped his arm firmly. "Captain Thorne," she yelled over the din, her voice surprisingly calm, steady. "We're getting you out of here. Can you make it to the jungle penetrator?" She indicated the weighted rescue device at the end of the cable. Stryker, weak, dizzy, on the verge of collapse, nodded. "Yeah, I think so." Together, with Angel's strength supporting him, they maneuvered him onto the penetrator. Angel clipped him in securely, then herself. She gave a sharp thumbs up to the crew chief in the hovering helicopter. "Ready for lift. Take us up." The cable went taut. They were rising, swinging away from the blood-stained cliff face, leaving the scene of his desperate struggle behind. Bullets whined past, one thudding heavily into the fuselage of the pave hawk with a sickening metallic clang. Stryker closed his eyes for a second, a silent, fervent prayer of thanks on his lips. As they were winched into the noisy, vibrating cabin of the helicopter, The first face he saw clearly was Kid Miller's. The young lieutenant was strapped into a jump seat near the door, his helmet off, his face pale, streaked with sweat and dirt. But his eyes were shining with an almost unbearable mixture of profound relief, lingering fear, and a deep, abiding respect. No words were spoken. None were needed. A look passed between them. The seasoned veteran and the rookie who had stepped up, who had refused to give up on his flight lead, who had orchestrated this miracle. It was a bond forged in fire and terror, a silent acknowledgement of shared peril and ultimate, unbreakable trust. Medics were on him instantly, skillfully cutting away his torn flight suit, assessing his myriad injuries. Starting in 4, the pain, held at bay for so long by sheer willpower and adrenaline, began to crash over him in overwhelming waves. But it was a good pain, a pain that signified he was alive, he was safe, he was among friends. He instinctively felt for the pocket over his heart. The photograph of Sarah and Lily was still there, crumpled and sweat-stained, but blessedly intact. He clutched it tightly. He was going home. The memory of dusty roads, the heavy weight he had carried for so long, didn't vanish, but it felt different. Lighter, somehow. He had faced a fire, stared into the abyss, and this time he had been able to protect his wingman, and through the incredible bravery and skill of others, he himself had been brought back from the very brink of oblivion. The powerful, rhythmic roar of the paved Hawk's engines was the sweetest, most beautiful music he had ever heard. The flight back to the forward operating base was a surreal blur of urgent medical attention and profound, overwhelming exhaustion. As the paved Hawk touched down, Stryker, strapped to a stretcher, saw a crowd gathered on the tarmac. His squadron mates, ground crew, support personnel, their faces etched with concern and relief. A wave of emotion, raw and powerful, washed over him. These were his people. This was his Air Force family. Kid Miller was one of the first to meet him as they carefully carried him off the helicopter, his hand briefly, firmly gripping Stryker's shoulder, a silent testament to their shared ordeal and the unbreakable bonds of brotherhood that tied them together. The days and weeks that followed were filled with intensive medical care, detailed debriefings, and the slow, arduous process of healing, both physically and mentally. His leg wound was serious, but thankfully not career-ending. The cuts, bruises, and exhaustion would fade with time. The deeper scars, the indelible memories of those terrifying hours alone in the hostile wilderness, the crushing weight of the decisions made in the heat of battle, those would remain a permanent, integral part of who he now was. But they were not scars of defeat or shame. They were marks of resilience, of a spirit that had been tested to its absolute limit and had refused to be broken. News of his incredible evasion, his selfless act to save Kid Miller by drawing enemy fire, and the daring under-fire rescue by the CSR team spread like wildfire through the ranks. He was hailed as a hero, a label he humbly, repeatedly, shied away from. The real heroes, he'd say, his voice quiet but firm with conviction, are the PJs like Sergeant Ramirez who came down that hoist under fire, the hog pilots who cleared our path, and Kid, who never gave up trying to find me, who coordinated it all. He knew, with absolute certainty, that survival in such extreme circumstances was never a solo act. It was a testament to unparalleled teamwork, rigorous training, and the unwavering, sacred commitment of American service members to leave no one behind. Eventually, Captain Marcus Stryker, Thorne recovered fully. He did return to flying, the familiar cockpit of his F-16 once again feeling like a second home, though a home now imbued with a deeper, more profound understanding of its inherent risks and its profound responsibilities. The memory of Dusty Rhodes' crash still lingered, a somber note in the symphony of his experiences, but it was now harmonized with the knowledge that he had faced a similar crucible and, through his actions and the extraordinary bravery of others, had seen a different, triumphant outcome. He had protected his wingman. He had survived. He had, in some small way, honored his vow. His story became more than just another war story. It became a quiet legend, whispered with respect in ready rooms and hangars, a powerful, enduring reminder of the incredible courage that resides within the human heart, the sheer tenacity of the American spirit when faced with seemingly insurmountable odds. It wasn't just about one pilot's desperate fight for survival. It was about the entire, intricate chain of valor, from the intelligence analysts who tried to predict the myriad threats, to the dedicated ground crews who kept the jets flying in peak condition, to the wingman who refused to abandon his leader, to the rescue teams who knowingly, willingly, flew into the very jaws of harm's way. It was a story about duty, honor, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds of loyalty. Captain Stryker Thorne continued to serve his country, a little grayer around the temples perhaps, a few more lines etched around his eyes, but with a quiet resolve that was stronger and more deeply rooted than ever. He carried the hard-won lessons of those harrowing days in Kavar Mountains with him always, a living testament to profound truth that even when the sky shatters around you, even when you fall into the deepest, most terrifying darkness, the courage to fight, the unyielding will to survive, and the unwavering bonds of loyalty can and will light the way home. His incredible journey reminds us all the heroes are not just born of myth and legend. They are made, forged in the unforgiving fires of adversity, guided by the unwavering, bright light of the American spirit. They are ordinary men and women who, when called upon by circumstance and conscience, rise to perform extraordinary acts, not for glory or recognition, but simply because it is the right thing to do. And that, ultimately, is the most powerful and inspiring story of all.